Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are talking about, Father forgive me, the clergy in Supernatural. But before we dig in, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Carole.
Hi, I'm Carole Stokes. I've been a fan since season 3. I started writing fanfic in 2012. All of my stories are on AO3 under Firesign 10, and you can find me on Twitter under true_Firesign 10.
Awesome. And Tawdra.
I'm Tawdra Kandle. I have been a Supernatural fan, I think, since the middle of season 1, and I veered away for a season, not on purpose, but just because for some reason I veered away and then caught up and have, absolutely love the boys. They are big favorites. So I love to talk about them at any time.
And I'm
flexible that way.
Yes, we all feel that way. I'm Gail Z. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, and more. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but all the modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I came into the show in season 11, binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months, so I'd be ready for the start of season 12. Yeah. Binged fan fiction when season 12 went on hiatus, and I've gone down the rabbit hole, and I haven't stopped yet, not trying to. So I'm having a good time. So clergy in Supernatural, this is, it is supernatural. So there is the whole idea of something bigger than what we see. Mm-hmm. Clergy are sometimes friends, sometimes foes, sometimes frenemies. Who among the many figures that the show used over the 15 years, who comes to your mind first? Yes, I have an alphabetical list, but let's talk about who really stuck in your mind. Tawdra?
I was looking at the list and looking for the name because I can't remember, but I'm sure you'll be able to tell me. And it didn't come up, even though I clicked a lot. The clergy, it was the father, and his daughter was she was like a prophetess. Mm-hmm. And Sam and Dean ran into them, and they were hunting. The people were hunting monsters, demons, vampires. Who were they? Do you remember?
Yes.
I don't remember their names. But
wasn't that 9 Problems?
Yes, it was Pastor Gideon and his daughter Leah. Sam and Dean ran into them when they were being chased by demons, and they came out with a fire truck with holy water.
Yep.
And Sam and Dean were like, "Wow, that's great."
Exactly. Yeah. They were my favorites. I loved the fact, I didn't love the fact that Leah wasn't really, that she was leading people in that direction. But I think for me, it very much stuck out as a really great analogy for things that really do happen in that setting. So I really, they were the first ones. As soon as I thought about this, they were who popped into my mind. So
I think she actually ended up being the Whore of Babylon, right?
Yeah, she was. Yeah, she was the Whore of Babylon. I didn't want to say that, but I didn't want to cast aspersion on her character. But yeah, that's how I remember her. So yeah.
Okay. Carole?
Well, I think the first one that comes to mind for me is Pastor Jim, because he's such a canon character in terms of he was John's friend way back when John first was becoming a hunter. And he was one of those reliable people that John could leave the kids with sometimes if he was going to be away or on a particularly dangerous hunt. He was John's backup. The boys knew if they were in some hotel room in, bum F someplace, that if they didn't hear from John in like 2 weeks, they were to call Pastor Jim. He was their backup. And so we didn't see him much, unfortunately. We really only see him, unfortunately, in the episode in which he gets killed. And that's why it's such a telling death for John, because Pastor Jim is so close to him and the boys, and they feel his death tremendously. He's one of those characters we've talked about in other panels that are like this, where he has a rich history in fan fiction. He is a character that is often used in fan fiction because he provides that kind of familial stability that later Bobby does, but they didn't have Bobby at this point. And it was Pastor Jim. So he's the first one that came to me. Second would have been Gideon and Leah, but there's certainly many other characters that I'm sure we'll visit that had their moments of interest.
Yeah, Pastor Jim, like Missouri Mosley, exists much longer in fan fiction than they got to live on the show. And so it's kind of jarring when you go back to do a rewatch and you realize that they really were only in 1 or 2 episodes because their lives span so large on AO3. I think the one that comes to my mind is Roy LaGrange, the evangelist, the healer that Sam drags Dean to after he electrocutes himself with the taser and the rawhead, and whose wife has a captive reaper, and that's how he's really able to do these miracles. I felt bad for Roy because he wasn't the one running the scam. We're so used to seeing the faith healer as the con man, and the faith healer intentionally misleading the flock and taking advantage of people's faith. And in this case, Roy was a victim as well because he was blind. He had no idea what his wife had done. He was acting in good faith, and it was his wife who had betrayed his trust as well as
Everybody
killing people.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a very interesting twist, because I remember going in to watch the episode the first time thinking, well, we all know who the bad guy is, and it wasn't. And I love when a show surprises me.
Yeah, he was totally sincere, and his sincerity was lovely. He was just lovely. And it wasn't until then we find out about, yes, the conniving power behind the throne, unfortunately. But, and he was as crushed as anybody. He really thought, oh, I was doing this, and I was, and actually, when you talk about Gideon, he was the same way. He was completely sincere. His whole goal was to lead his flock, to keep everybody safe. And, she played him, and he was as devastated as anybody, and it's almost this example of people taking something too far. They purport to be adhering to these ideals and concepts, and then push it so far that you had the mother going, I don't care, I'm going to kill everybody as long as my son and my family is safe, and, it just leads to horrific ends.
Yeah. Now, one of the other good guys was Father Luca Camilleri from A Most Holy Man. And that was another interesting one with a twist. It almost had to me at least, a little bit of a Da Vinci Code feel to it. And talk about hiding something in plain sight. They needed the blood of a most holy man. And you've got Camilleri the whole way through. And then he finally goes, well, I'll give it to you. So that was one
they finally find out he's actually been dubbed that by the Pope? Wasn't it the Pope or something who said that?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my God, it's you.
It's actually his bequested title.
Right. And they're like, oh, this is what we were. I could have had a V8, So, and then of course, because he is such a good man, he gives them his blood.
Tawdra, any other good guys you can think of?
I'm sorry?
Any other good guys you can think of?
Oh, definitely. Pastor Joe in season 15. He runs the Patchwork Community Shelter.
Oh, yeah.
He originally started out in a more structured religious environment, but then broadened his view, and he was just open to anybody. The whole theme was about helping and reaching out and, all of that kind of stuff. And again, unfortunately, Viper in the bosom, it was his daughter,
Mhm.
Yeah.
shocking, just so shocking, because you really don't see that one coming, and it's horrific. I mean, she's chopping people's fingers off and stuff. And, it's just terrible, but, a really genuinely good soul, doing good, reaching out to people, all of that, but almost blinded. And it really, even Gideon here too, again, where he was almost blinded by his desire to do good. And he's so focused on that, he's not seeing the rest of the picture.
What I thought was really interesting in that episode is he actually gives comfort to an angel and the guy who becomes the future God. Talk about having angels unaware in your midst.
Right.
And yet both of them desperately needed the comfort and counseling he gave to them. Who knows what impact that had on Jack when he finally
down the pipe,
becomes God. And yet, of course, he had no idea. Tawdra, how about you?
There's Jim Myers, who, of werewolf fame, which always sticks in my mind because I actually know a pastor whose name is Jim Myers. So, but it was that same thing. And I think we're seeing a little bit of a trend here, aren't we? Because he, they assume that he's the one who is the head of this cult, the Ma, and it's not. Again, it's his wife who is, planning to kill
the non-pure bloods.
Right. In order to, and then blame it in order to draw her husband into this the cult of Ma, and I was, I love the whole Garth being a werewolf thing. That just, I just love Garth. I just felt like Garth was like this super cool addition to the Winchester extended family, and just the way that they treated him and the way that they looked at him, and it was just I loved him. So I was really worried about him being in that family, and very relieved when when Jim turned out to be okay. So that was a good one.
We saw a lot of Protestant and Catholic clergy, but I always loved Aaron Bass, and of course his with the Golem. I would have loved to have seen more of them because I was fascinated with with the lore there. I have read other Golem stories, Isaac Bashevis Singer stories, figure a lot of those things. And they actually hewed, as they often did, very true to the lore and got it right. And I just loved having Aaron's perspective, especially when, he's the outsider, he's watching Sam and Dean as they're burning the body. And I think this was an ad lib by Jared. Sam puts his hands out to warm over the fire, and Aaron just says to his golem, they're psychopaths. Which, you could be mistaken for that if you didn't know the boys like we do.
Right.
Who else before we turn to the dark side?
So I thought, I believe we need to include the women of religion in here as well. And so I would bring in Sister Julia, who was the young nun in Mother's Little Helper, and she ended up leaving finally, but was there during that whole Abaddon taking over Josie thing, and was just so whacked out by everything. She's like, I can't stay here, but she was definitely a force for good. And despite all the years, when she saw it was happening again, she came right back and said, this is happening again, and gave Sam a lot of that important back information so that they understood what happened, to Josie and everything. And also Sister Matthias in Painted Black. So she had somewhat unwittingly, I think, made friends with Isabella, she didn't realize was a vengeful spirit.
Mhm.
And but she herself was a good person and was doing good and wanted to help Sam and Dean figure out what was happening and what was happening with these murders in her convent and stuff. So I thought those were both characters for the good. And we certainly didn't want to not include, I think, the female, even they're not really clergy, but they're certainly of a religious order, living a religious life,
And Painted Black was the one where the vengeful spirit had been the painter's model,
Used,
and
right,
then was forced
her
into,
blood in the
yeah,
paint.
was sort of forced into holy orders out of shame. And yeah, she was someone that, while she was doing bad things, you could definitely understand where she was coming from and why she got that way, which I like when you can, that makes them much more three-dimensional.
Right. They're not just like, hey, I'm instantly bad. It's like, no, there was a path. And as they went down the path, here's what happened, the whole, consequences of either their actions or the actions of others. And this, in Isabella's case, the actions of the painter who then cast her aside and, and everything. So yeah, that's what makes it so well-rounded. And I think that Supernatural generally does a really good job with, with their one-offs.
Tawdra?
I'm searching. You guys are hitting all the ones that I'm thinking about.
I'm cheating. I'm going down the list on SuperWiki. The other one that came to my mind as a good guy was in Houses of the Holy. The priest that Sam works with, they think that they're getting an angel, and this is before Cass is part of the story, or something angelic or heavenly, and it really turns out to be Father Gregory, who is a vengeful spirit and is kind of putting himself in the place of God.
But he doesn't know it. He
Right.
thinks he's doing God's work because he's bringing these yucky people, to justice. He's the loaded gun, but he's aiming it at, the pedophile and the would-be rapist and stuff, which makes it so confusing because, the kind of the right things are happening, but the wrong way, and they have the right motives, but the wrong methods. And, so there's a lot of gray area going on there. And when they finally have to actually confront Father Gregory, and first they have to convince his partner, Father Reynolds, that this is what's happening, because he's like, what are you talking about? And they finally are able to prove to him that this is what's happening. And then he's even saying to Father Gregory, you must go to rest, you must let me, put you to rest, kind of thing.
Well, and I thought that one of the things that happens many times when clergy are involved in the story is that we also get an insight into how the boys are thinking about these things. And on a rewatch of Houses of the Holy, now that we know what unfolds over the whole 15 years, this was before they had met Cass, this was before the Angel and the Demon Wars, this was before Chuck or Jack. So much is going to happen in the future. And you have Sam and Dean having that conversation at the end where Sam admits to praying and Dean's skeptical, but at the same time, he doesn't want to ruin it for Sam. And that the first time Sam meets an angel, they go, oh yes, the abomination, the boy with the demon blood. And you know what's coming. You just want to wrap them in cotton wool and protect them. But I think it's interesting the way the show, without getting preachy or getting anybody on a soapbox, gave us those insights into the boys. And I saw an interview that, and how things change over 15 years. When they shot Houses of the Holy, apparently Jensen and Jared had some concerns that this show was going to take a certain viewpoint, and they really didn't want to be mouthpieces for something. And so they sat down with Kripke just make sure they weren't going to get used. And I'm going, and how did you go from being concerned about that to let's kill God? I'd love to get the personal journey there from, we're really worried about an angel, you know, a guy who isn't really an angel and thinks he is too. Let's plot God's murder.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always found it, when we're talking about the fact that you have these people in the clergy or clergy adjacent who are really seriously bad, even though the clergy figure themselves who you think are going to be bad actually turn out to be more innocent, or not the maybe not innocent, but certainly not the big bad, right? And I just think that I'm thinking about Gideon specifically, but the kind of innocence or gullibility. I don't really mean gullibility. It's such a nice juxtaposition to Sam and Dean's kind of world weary. We've seen it all. We know it. You know, it's just a nice, almost us. Somebody standing in for us as the viewers in a lot of ways. You know, juxtaposed to their very. You know, nothing surprises them anymore. You know, if somebody turns out to be a werewolf, nah, somebody turns out to be a vampire, a demon, whatever. They're more surprised when somebody turns out to be just a normal everyday person, right? So that always was something that fascinated me, and that the show never took the stereotypical view of, you know, you have this person and it is the pastor who's bad. You know, even X-Files, I feel like, did that a lot of times. So they always twist a little bit, surprise me in a happy way.
One of the things I would have loved to have seen with Pastor Jim, or with the guy who was in that episode, Carole, that you mentioned, where Cass and Jack.
Oh, Pastor Joe.
Pastor Joe. You know, if you
Dr. Sexy.
spend any time in you know, in or around truck stops, you know that there's usually a chaplain, somebody who's very laid back, might not even have a collar, but they're there if somebody needs to talk. And you know, people are out on the road all the time, they don't get home for services, but they still might need to unburden themselves. And I could just see a version of Pastor Jim, or somebody who was a hunter and came from a clergy background, being the person to sit down with them over a drink or two and say, so, you know, hunter confessional, you know. Because I can see for some people having the need for that, and other people, of course, you know, they don't. But that could have been an interesting addition to the Roadhouse if we'd been allowed to keep it a little longer.
Yeah, it would have
around the back.
Exactly. What a great idea. Because you know that the kills are not always straightforward. I mean, we know that. We see that so many times when Sam is you know, saying we can't do this, you know, that this person isn't trying to hurt anybody, we should just let them live. And then conversely, when it happens with Dean. So we know that they're not always easy. You don't always sleep well after a kill, even if you know that it's a demon. So I agree with you. I think that would have been, you know,
well, and there are the ones you can't save, the ones you get there too late for.
Right.
There are the ones like Magda who, through no fault of theirs, didn't make it.
Right.
And so I would think that there would be a real place for that, for those who feel that way,
right,
to be able to talk to somebody who understands the life and still, you know, can provide that. Of course, after you find out God is quite such a dick, I'm not sure that sort of colors everything else.
True. Very, very true. I think that's a great fan fiction line there, though, you know?
The
Pastor Jim's roadside confessional. I like it. I think there's a whole anthology there, honestly.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
So some of the bad guys, willingly or not, you know, the one that I came to first was Dominic Lane, who is the ill-fated priest at the St. Mary's Convent in Ilchester, who was possessed.
Father Lean.
Hazel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, that guy ended up.
He was a very naughty boy.
He was, but he was also possessed. So it
Right.
wasn't really him. Of course, he slaughtered everybody.
That seems to be such a high risk incidence of possession among the clergy. As I was making my notes, it was like, okay, here's the non-possessed and here's the possessed, because there were so many of them. It was like this kind of short gateway to to the black eyes, And then, of course, anything can happen, of course, and it always catches us off guard because we're not anticipating it. When Father Lean is walking down the center of that church with the nuns on either side, we're not anticipating him to turn it into a bloodbath.
Yeah.
So it's always a bit of a shocker.
Tawdra, you have any more naughty clergy for us?
I'm thinking, well, Sister Joe, who is, of course, so I don't have the list in front of me. I don't have the benefit there. But she's clergy. I mean, she's actually not a human clergy, but she's not exactly on the up and up. And I felt like that she definitely played on people's needs, and she certainly was willing to play one side against the other, and she was with whoever could serve her best. So yeah.
And supply her with good shoes.
Oh, of course,
because that matters.
I was gonna say, doesn't that go without saying? Yeah.
Yes. That must have been a delicious role for Danielle.
Oh yeah, I thought that would be really fun. I think it's really funny that actually both of the wives played, not great people, Ruby and
and got to gang up together at one point.
Yes, always. I mean, that was super fun. That was really a lot of fun. Yeah.
One of the other guys that comes to my mind is Buddy Boyle. Now he was the scummy televangelist that got possessed by Bartholomew. And so he was exhorting the faithful to say yes to the angels and let them in. And so, he was just, he wasn't an honest person before he got possessed by Bartholomew. And Bartholomew, even though he was an angel, sure didn't help.
No. And there's somebody else who always sticks in my mind is right after Castiel became, when he had consumed all of the Leviathans, and he goes into that church where the pastor is preaching. And to me, that pastor always, even though I don't even know if he was named, and he certainly wasn't demonic or anything, but he always, I really wasn't upset when he got smoted or smited or whatever. I was like, that's reasonable. I get that, that was okay.
Yeah. I always think of there's two people who come to mind for me. One is Father Gail in Sin City. So he's the town priest, and he's once again one of those ones where we don't realize that he's possessed until he's at the bar drinking and he snaps out the black eyes, and we realize he's the one hooking up with Casey, the sexy bartender. And
that's right. I forgot.
So that's a real, he's got that kind of Irish good looks priest kind of thing going on, and then he's like, oh, he's out. And then the other one is once again back to Mother's Little Helper. So we had Julia on the good side, the little novitiate nun. But then we had the Mother Superior, and she was the one who was actually harvesting those souls for Abaddon and everything. And she was that kind of tough looking nun to begin with, but then you find out, oh, she's not working on the good side here. And she was really good at at being bad.
I figure whoever wrote her went to Catholic school.
Yeah. Got those rulers on the
Oh,
knuckles.
on the knuckles. Yep. Mm-hmm.
That seems to leave an indelible mark, not just the rulers, but the schooling.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was that really kind of hard-bitten nun, and you think, oh, but she's got a heart of gold. Nope.
Oh,
No, she did not.
She was one mean penguin. I had friends who went to Catholic school.
Oh,
oh.
Now, one of the other ones who wasn't exactly possessed, but his own failings and inability to see his failings enabled an evil to work through him was Reverend Sorensen in Hookman.
Yeah.
oh. You're so good about picking out some of these little ones that I just didn't even think about.
I have the list.
Yeah, I was gonna say the list helps. I remember episodes and I remember situations, but yes, I remember him now. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly possessed, but because of his very puritanical, self-righteous, punitive views,
Yeah.
it enabled the Hookman spirit, who had been a former minister,
Mhm.
to come back to life. So
To get his hooks in.
yes, which I thought was an interesting twist, because in that case, he himself wasn't the bad guy, but he was almost a channel that allowed the bad guy back into the world.
Yeah.
Mhm. And at least then he realized it afterward, that that's kind of what had happened. He had provided that kind of access with driving his daughter away, and like you said, the puritanical views and everything. But yeah, once again, kind of blinded by his own goal and not paying attention to what was really going on.
Mm-hmm. I think in some ways we also have to mention Emmanuel, aka Cass with no memory,
Right.
when he got brought back without any memory and was healing people. So even though he didn't know he was an angel, he reverted to doing good, trying to do the right thing. And kind of juxtapose that with, again, Jimmy Novak wasn't clergy per se, but he was an extremely devout person. I think allowing an angel to possess you willingly takes devout to a whole new level. So I thought that was an interesting kind of bookend to cast with both of those characters. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you just summed that up really well, in terms of, like, we start with Jimmy Novak, who's human but very devout, and we could see that in his family life and everything. Thought it was an honor to be able to become a vessel for the angel. And then even once he doesn't have any recollection of who either Castiel or Jimmy Novak is, he's this completely blank persona, yet is still driven to help and reach out and heal and do all of that kind of stuff, even though he has no clue what's really happening. That was just his instinct, his innate drive was to do that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I always thought the whole story of how Cass became, or Jimmy Newcomb became the vessel for Cass was really interesting, because having known men like that who kind of gave their all for a religion, or a religion, or a church or something like that, at the expense of their family. And you saw that was very much at the expense of his family, and how it affected them. I really that really hit home for me. And yeah, I do, even when he didn't have any recollection of what had happened before. I thought it was I agree with you. It's a nice way to kind of parenthesize both of those experiences. So
it's almost the idea of being reincarnated and coming back to being the same sort of person time and again, because he actually kind of was. But I agree with you, Tawdra, because I think all of the helping professions have a dark side where you get praised and everybody really appreciates all that you do for the community, but you don't get praised the same way for being there for your own family. So if people aren't aware and have a big endless hole that needs to be filled, it's very easy to fall into that hero mode and actually damaging the family because you don't get accolades for just being a good dad or mom.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting element.
yeah.
One of the other people, and you had brought up the Mother's Little Helper episode, Carole, but we have Julia, who had been a nun and then left the order, and yet she's trying to tell the police this is demons, and nobody will believe her until Sam and Dean show up and go, tell us about those demons. I thought that was interesting, showing someone who had been in holy orders and left and was still trying to help.
Yeah, definitely very aware of the world, both the world around and the threats they're in. She had seen true evil. She had been face to face with true evil, and it left its mark, and she was compelled to speak, even though in the face of disbelief, she was like, she had to speak her truth. That was her truth, and she had to say it.
Tawdra, any other thoughts
On Julia?
Yeah.
No, not necessarily. I do think that it's just, to me, interesting, and this is more of an overall observation, that supernatural does incorporate so much of traditional, non-traditional, and just day-to-day spirituality. A lot of shows just neglect, and they don't paint it completely black or completely white. You see that there are priests and ministers who wear black hats, and there are priests and ministers who wear white hats, and it's not stereotypical. And that was what I always loved about it, is that it was just very well done and well included in the whole world. And just I think, especially given the direction that it ended up going, as you said, with the Chuck and how everything went with Jack, and I think that was especially a cool way to start that from the beginning, that was always part of the world. And with Father Jim being John's good friend, and just the fact that you had this pastor who was a hunter, I love that. I think that's very cool. I thought it was a great way to incorporate it.
And a great resource, because he would have known all of this, the church views and the church lore that probably a lot of the hunters may not have known,
Well,
and so he could provide some of that insight.
Maybe I'm here to tell you that my husband, as an Anglican priest, does not know half the demon stuff that I do. I do not consult with him when I feel an attack. He doesn't have the salt handy, and he really, I don't think that if he had to draw one of the things on the wall, he could do it to save his life or mine. So
I don't think they cover that in seminary anymore, which is just a shame.
It really is.
Yeah, that you've been immersed in this fandom a lot, and in urban fantasy, when you read the exorcism and go, wait, you misspelled that.
It's very true. Yeah.
There's one guy we haven't mentioned, and I like him, and he's important because he pertains to the third trial, and that's the priest who was working with the men of letters to cure a demon. And they they're trying to find out about the third trial, and they stumble upon, something, and they follow it, and they find the dungeon. First of all, they're like, "Oh, we have a dungeon." But then, they're watching the tape of him, and then they are able to find his assistant, who's still alive and also has more information and more of the reels, so they can watch him trying to develop this ritual to cure a demon, which is then the third trial,
Mhm.
So, but the assistant is so disturbed by the whole thing. Now, he doesn't leave the order, but he leaves that. Like, he leaves that guy, and he leaves him in the letters, and he like goes off to just be a regular priest because he's pretty whacked out.
Which you would be. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I think it's interesting that, in Houses of the Holy, Sam admits that he's always prayed, and Dean is very skeptical. But he comes around to be supportive because, hey, it's a rough life. You take the comfort where you can. And yet we see Dean pray more often than we see Sam pray. So we certainly saw him pray when Sam was dying after the trials, to anybody who would listen. We saw him pray futilely to Chuck when Cass was taken, when Cass was killed. In season 12, you have to qualify.
You have to qualify that.
But we've seen Dean in desperation pray, and I can't. In fact, I think there was one episode we actually saw him go to confession. Didn't we?
I think he went for a reason, though.
I was going to say, I don't think he. I think he went for a purpose. Yeah.
He went because he had to go. But yeah, he wasn't there sincerely for confession, but we did see him go. Yes. And I just think it's interesting that the skeptic we see pray more often than the believer.
But if I may interject.
Sure.
Sam prays from day one because he actually has faith.
Yeah.
Dean we see pray after Castiel is there. So Dean prays now because it's been proven to him.
Yeah.
So before then, he didn't, because he was so much of a skeptic. But having now an angel in their lives and realizing that this stuff really is going on, that's when he can pray now, because he knows there's really something there. I think if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't see him do that. When he's praying for a reason. He's not just like, help me, I need, he's like, come heal my brother, help us through this. It's all very concrete.
His prayers when he's trying to get Castiel to come always crack me up. It's like, dear Castiel, he's just extemporaneous off the top of it. It's hysterical.
Get your feathery ass down here.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
What came to my mind.
Yeah.
Well, they say that there are no atheists in foxholes, but a whole lot happens in foxholes in Supernatural.
As Annie Hawkins will attest.
Yes. And I think that's a great point that you brought up, Carole. I would imagine that any faith John had, and that certainly would have been sorely tested being boots on the ground in Vietnam, if he came back with any faith, having Mary taken that way, even if he didn't know yet about the demon, would have sorely put him in the category of, where were you when I needed you, which is often how people lose their connection to faith. So the boys would not have been brought up with that sort of devoutness, maybe sickness and the, hey, this is all a scam.
Yeah, I could see them, like, for instance, as when they're little and they're staying with, once again, Pastor Jim, they were exposed, and that's probably where the seeds of Sam's faith were planted. But Dean, having actually gone through the loss of his mother and remembering it, was like, he didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
Where Sam is, virgin soil, so to speak. And oh gosh, I had a point here. Another point in addition to this point. Carry on.
I agree though.
It was
I would
here and
think
it was
that
gone.
the dean is definitely going to be the the more skeptical, the more kind of road weary kind of guy, just because he was really taking the brunt of everything. And you realize that almost every situation, Sam is being protected, either by his father or by Dean or by both.
Mhm.
So I think that's, go ahead. You thought of it.
If you remember in the young John and young Mary, when Mary is pregnant with Dean and she finds the little angel statuette and she puts it
Yeah.
up in the nursery and she's like, I love the thought of angels watching over. And John is like, yeah, whatever. If you like it, I like it. If you think it's
Yeah.
good, I think it's good. So I think there in that brief 10 seconds, we get the fact that he's done with it. Like you said, the foxholes and, he's been through, he's done with it. He knows that God wasn't going to save anybody in those foxholes if they didn't save themselves. And losing Mary puts the total kibosh on it. Yeah, so I think that's where his viewpoint is already. And then it's just one of those little tiny nuggets, that they put in there and then you'll go.
I think one of the other things about Sam is he has this sense long before he knows about demon blood. When he talks about that Knights of the Round Table book, and he never thought he could be a knight because he didn't think he was pure enough. So you've got this kid who has that feeling from an early age, trying harder than average to make up for something he doesn't even know what it is. And then you've got Dean, who's really more of a it's better to beg forgiveness than ask permission kind of guy.
Right.
And he prays for Sammy. He prays for Bobby. He prays for Cass. He doesn't pray for him. He prays for Mary. He doesn't pray for himself.
Yeah.
Even when he's staring down, heaven and hell. So, well, folks, we are at the end of our time. It always goes so fast. But before we leave, please tell everybody where we can find you online. Tawdra.
You can find me on my website is tawdrakandle.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok slightly, just a little bit. And my reader group is called The Naughty Temptresses, and they're on Facebook. And pretty much if you want to find me, just search my first name and I'm the first few pages. So there's very few of us around.
Awesome. Thank you. Carole?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter as true_firesign10. All my fiction is on AO3 under firesign10. You can find me on WordPress under firesign10. And you'll also see me in Continual and in the TFWNC Supernatural group. And there I will be.
I'm findable by gailzmartin.com or morganbryce.com. All of my social media for the writing is tied to those names, so spell them right and you'll find me. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group on Facebook, and I run the Supernatural track and other things here at Continual. So I'm pretty easy to find. Thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon. So we'll see you online.